Back to Chaos in a Dream, 3 Lives, 3 Worlds audiobook. Pillow Book of Samsara. By Tangqi. English translation from Elad Zoompide, Wixsite.com. Chapter 7. 2 armies encamped opposite each other was an indication of a stalemate between them. When 2 armies are locked in a stalemate, the scales tend to tilt rather quickly in either direction, and fighting could possibly erupt at any time. Logically speaking, Jiashui was still a dangerous place, so Fengjiu stayed there for 3 days before she was sent back to the Heavenly Jade Sea. Previously, the matter about Dijun having a Diho had spread like wildfire throughout the 8 realms. But as most of the god race had never seen the legendary Diho, many people had remained skeptical about it. Fengjiu's trip to Jiashui had proven the rumor to be true. There was no shortage of female generals among the god officers. The male generals felt shocked about this matter, while the female generals were not only shocked, they were also each sad and dispirited. However, Fengjiu was completely unaware about these events, and made a pact with Dijun that if the battlefields were fine in the following month, she would bring Bai Gun Gun along to see him. Although she could not bear to leave him, she did not openly express it, and sensibly returned to the Heavenly Jade Sea along with Fei Wei. Not a few days had gone by after their return to the Heavenly Jade Sea when a headache-inducing matter occurred. Around the morning of the 7th day, the Heavenly Jade Sea welcomed a party of visitors. Since Dijun was not around, the people that could induce Fei Wei to bring them into the Heavenly Jade Sea were naturally not ordinary. They were the clan leader of the Spirit Crane clan, his wife and his daughter. Fei Wei explained that Dijun was born transformatively from the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, and was an orphan with neither a father nor a mother. At the time of his birth, his spirit energy was so weak that he was almost torn apart by tigers and wolves as a meal. But as luck would have it, he was rescued by the Spirit Crane couple who happened to pass by. The Spirit Crane couple saw how pitiful Dijun was, so they brought him back with them to the earthly realms and looked after him for several years, granting him the kindness of meals. Hence, over the last 100,000 years or so, Dijun had been very respectful towards them and would almost always accede to their every plea despite his indifferent personality and his preference towards not meddling in the business of others. Presently, Fengjiu and Little Gun Gun were at a small pavilion not far from the guest hall listening to Fei Wei talking about these past events. Both of them had studied the history of the Chaos era and were looking at each other silently. Little Gun Gun put his hand up first. The Spirit Crane couple, were they Princess Jihe's parents? At this time, Jihe had not been born yet, so Fei Wei did not know who she was and was naturally unable to answer this question. But Fengjiu nodded her head seriously, and they should be. They were indeed Princess Jihe's parents. What the historical annals of the Great Chaos period did not record was the fact that the Spirit Crane couple, aside from giving birth to Jihe before they faded, had once adopted a daughter in their earlier years named Chui. Fairy Chui was given a sweet, demure name, and her personality was gentle and refined. The Spirit Crane couple felt that Donghua appeared to possess a cold face and a cold heart, and did not subscribe to the secular notion of predestined bonds of affinity to worldly desires. But he was the favored son of heaven, an elite god out of thousands, and his moral character and talents were far beyond gods of similar ranking. It would be impossible for him not to pass down his excellent bloodline, so he would eventually have to take a wife. After all, none of the girls in the 8 realms could get close to Donghua, so compared to them, Chui had more mutual affection for Donghua. So when the time was right, they would step in and take the initiative to propose the marriage to him. It would be unlikely for him not to agree. If Donghua were to marry Chui, he would naturally become a part of the Spirit Crane clan. So in the event that they fade, not only would Chui have someone to rely on, the Spirit Crane clan would also have someone to entrust. In the master plan of the Spirit Crane couple, this major matter was originally intended to be worked on at an unhurried pace and executed in tiny steps. But who would expect that a new mistress of the Heavenly Jade Sea would suddenly cut in and interrupt their plans halfway? The Spirit Crane couple were in a state of panic. Hence, they hurriedly brought their daughter with them to the Heavenly Jade Sea to orchestrate a forced marriage. The two of them had definitely harbored the intention of using Dong Hua's gratitude to force him into marriage. But the silver-haired young man with the extraordinary brilliant disposition was no longer the little orphan relying on the charity of meals the spirit crane couple offered to survive. The other party was now the master god of the 8 realms, so they did not dare to be too transparent with their thoughts. Husband and wife both stayed at the heavenly Jade Sea for only a day, before excusing themselves with other matters. They then departed, leaving only Fairy Chu-yi and a letter addressed to Di-jun at the heavenly Jade Sea. The gist of the letter said Chu-yi admired Di-jun and was completely devoted to marrying him. Although they both knew that he already had a wife, Chu-yi did not mind being a wife of equal status to Miss Bai, serving one husband together. Besides, they had also heard Miss Bai mention that she was an orphan girl. Being an orphan meant she would not be implicated by her family or bound to any established rules. As such, she probably did not care about all these things. So could Di-jun please consider the kindness they have shown to him during the time when he was nurtured by them and fulfilled Chu-yi's yearning as well as the wishes of an old couple? And so on and so forth. Feng Jiu had not seen the letter, but she had asked Fei Wei about it. Fei Wei most certainly did not dare open the letter. But being a clever little imp, he arrived at a conclusion after discerning what they thought from their body language. When he heard Feng Jiu ask about it, he didn't dare hide anything, and honestly expressed his views based on what he knew of them over the years. He had guessed that they should be thinking of letting Fairy Chu-yi come to the heavenly Jade Sea to be his wife of equal status. At first, little Gun Gun had no idea what a wife of equal status meant. The ignorance of a child was his bliss, so he did not feel angry until Fei Wei considerately explained that a wife of equal status meant that Chu-yi also wanted to become his mother. Gun Gun exploded with rage on the spot. But Feng Jiu remained unperturbed and persuaded Gun Gun not to panic. "Don't be alarmed," she said calmly. The first age after the establishment of the new order of the gods was the age of far antiquity. You panicked because you have not studied the age of far antiquity in your history lessons. With regards to the age of far antiquity, you need to know that whether it was formal history or unofficial history, there was no mention of your father lord's encounter with such a marriage. So it can clearly be seen that this matter did not end as intended. Is that true? Gun Gun was skeptical. Jiu, you're not lying to me, are you? Feng Jiu looked at Gun Gun with a profound glance, and "I did not lie to you, as knowledge never lies." Fei Wei was stunned. That was how Fairy Chu-yi came to stay at the heavenly Jade Sea. If the news of an unmarried maiden being left at the heavenly Jade Sea for no particular reason were to spread, the resulting rumor would not be pleasant to the ears. But Fei Wei did not dare to make the decision to drive the fairy out of the heavenly Jade Sea, so he was forced to quickly take the spirit crane couple's letter to Jia Shui to consult Di-jun on the matter. After he had consulted with Di-jun and returned, he discovered that Fairy Chu-yi had disappeared, and Feng Jiu had also gone missing. Little Gun Gun was once again flying his kite in the garden when he saw Fei Wei coming to look for him. Flying his kite like an expert, it was like this, he explained. "Brother Fei Wei, after you left, Jiu ran into Fairy Chu-yi twice and noticed her persistently worried frown. So she asked her what she was worried about. As it turns out, the fairy was indeed distressed about something. Gun Gun's face was filled with pity. She said she already had a sweetheart and did not intend to stay at the heavenly Jade Sea to wreck or join our big family. But as her sweetheart does not belong to a large clan, her parents looked down on him and broke them apart. She was in distress because of this." Jiu was shocked when she heard this. She said that it was rare to encounter a girl who doesn't like Father Lord in this era, so Fairy Chu-yi was indeed an unusual girl in this world that was worth admiring. Then Jiu unlocked the heavenly Jade Sea, setting the fairy free, helping her to elope with her lover. What Fei Wei did not understand was, since Fairy Chu-yi has eloped, we'll just let her elope. That is fine. But why did Di-ho also disappear? Little Gun Gun continued to explain. Fairy Chu-yi bumped into her sweetheart as soon as she stepped out. He was waiting forlornly at the entrance. When they saw each other, they hugged and wept disconsolately on each other's shoulder. Then they prepared to get married straight away. However, their marriage still needed a witness, so kind-hearted Jiao decided to help them all the way to the end. Hence, she accompanied them when they ran away so that she could be their witness. Gun looked pleased with himself as he finished speaking and used an idiom to conclude. It was very inspiring and tragic. Fei Wei did not have any time to praise Gun on the recent improvements to his grammar. Both his legs instantly buckled as soon as he heard that Diho had gone to finish a good deed by running away with Chui. He also forgot to ask Gun if he knew where they might be at this moment, and hastily sent a young immortal child to notify Dijun. After that, he hurried out of the door to chase after the missing Diho, leaving Gun, who was tugging on his kite strings, stunned. Why didn't anyone ask me where Jiao had gone to before going out to find her? After thinking about it for a moment, he nodded his head and talked to himself. Perhaps the reason was because they had already deduced that Jiao is at our maternal ancestors when Yuan Valley. He gasped with admiration from the bottom of his heart. Brother Fei Wei is really incredible. He went back to flying his kite as he spoke, carefree and worry-free once again. But Brother Fei Wei was not that incredible. Fei Wei bumped around like a headless fly and found nothing after searching for 2 days. But he ran into Dijun, who was on the road looking for her. Following the breath essence on Feng Jiao's half-heart ring, Dijun led him to an Yuan Valley in the Eastern Realm where they found the person they were looking for. When they found her, Diho's tiny self was drunkenly creating a din on the wedding night of Chu-yi and her sweetheart. Diho stood in front of Chu-yi, clinging onto her shoulders with the air of a person who had personally experienced it, speaking earnestly and sincerely. It's true. Don't be sad. Not having any close family around to congratulate you on your wedding night is nothing. At least the groom is here. She continued honestly, in this world, there are those pitiful brides where the groom wasn't there on their wedding day. Compared to those brides, you are already very fortunate. Chu-yi forced a smile and was about to say something when her face paled. Feng Jiao was curious and followed Chu-yi's gaze, turning her head behind her to look. She shivered and then stiffened a little before turning back to continue looking at Chu-yi. But if the husband lord of that kind of bride did not show up at their wedding because he had to save the world, then that bride is not pitiful. After all, she married a husband lord who could save the world. So she is really lucky. After she finished saying those words, she struck a posture holding up her head with both hands. I feel a little dizzy. I am going to sleep now. She immediately fell downwards as soon as she stopped talking. Remembering that she should not fall onto the marriage bed of others, she rigidly collapsed crookedly towards the cold, muddy ground. Just before she made close contact with the mud, a pair of sturdy arms caught her. She quietly opened her eyes into small slits and saw the expressionless face of Dijun looking at her, and quickly shut her eyes again. Chu-yi, who was sitting on the bed, saw Dijun appearing and was so frightened that her face drained of color. She was afraid that this merciless foster brother would break them up and send her back to her parents to be disciplined. So she couldn't stop her tears from falling. The disparity between the strength of the groom and Dijun was large, but he was still a man. So he summoned his courage, bravely putting himself in front of Chu-yi to protect her. Dijun scooped Feng Jiao up into his arms and looked at both of them. Both of you. The newlyweds glared at Dijun as if he was their enemy. Dijun remained indifferent. Still haven't consummated your marriage because Xiaobai was creating a din? The two newlyweds facing their enemy went blank for a moment before nodding their heads. Dijun gave an N sound, then make the most of his time. He deliberated on his choice of words. After all, a wonderful moment on a beautiful night is worth 1,000 gold. Chu-yi widened her eyes in shock after hearing, a wonderful moment on a beautiful night is worth 1,000 gold, coming from Dijun. She felt that either he or she had been hit by nefarious influences. Dijun was unconcerned. He carried Feng Jiao in one arm, while using his other hand to magic a bottle of medicine, placing it in front of the couple's marital bed. This medicine can assist the both of you in welcoming a child sooner. He thought about it and patted the groom on his shoulder. Don't disappoint me. After that, he left the bridal chamber carrying Feng Jiao in his arms. Don't disappoint Dijun, but in what? The pair of newlyweds looked at each other blankly. Fei Wei was the last to leave, so he gave a word of advice to the two of them, explaining the deeper meaning behind Dijun's words. Dijun has even prepared the medicine for you both. If the two of you were to consummate your marriage quickly and give birth to a child, this matter will be set in stone and cannot be changed. Then Venerable Lord Spirit Crane naturally can't beat the Mandarin ducks with a stick, breaking both of you up, and neither will he bother Dijun again. Isn't this a solution that is not only the best of both worlds, but also to everyone's delight and satisfaction? The pair of newlyweds suddenly saw the light. While their faces flushed with excitement, their innermost thoughts were complicated. They felt as if they had gained some new knowledge about the legendary Donghua, who was said to be uninterested in worldly desires. When Fengzhou woke up, she was inside Dijun's tent at the banks of the Jiashui River. She was still a bit confused, so she thought for a long time while she was lying down. She remembered that she had been at Wenyuan Valley last night, witnessing the wedding of Chu-yi and her sweetheart. She had watched Chu-yi and her sweetheart harmoniously getting married. They were holding each other's hands and paying their respects to heaven and earth, so she had become a little envious. She had envied and finally drank too much wine. After that, she talked to Chu-yi for a while, and then, it seemed like, then Dijun had arrived. Fengzhou quivered and suddenly sat up. Briefly sweeping her eyes around the room, she realized that this appeared most definitely to be Dijun's large tent. She glanced around again after composing herself and discovered that the interior decor of the tent seemed to be different from the last time she was here. For example, the place she was sleeping at originally had a plain curtain, but it was now a green canopy. The area outside the muslin canopy was no longer illuminated by a bright pearl, but a dim glance revealed red lanterns and tall candles reflecting light onto each other, brightening the room. In addition to these, threads of bright, lustrous and colorful silk were hanging down from the middle of the tent roof. Fengzhou sat cross-legged on the felt blanket, knitting her brow while deep in thought. Something wasn't quite right. These tall candles and green canopy, red lanterns and colorful silk seemed like the things used in weddings, weren't they? As she kept thinking, she raised her hand to push aside the muslin canopy, intending to confirm her findings. But at this opportune moment, Dijun raised the curtain and entered the tent. Fengzhou was silent for a while as Dijun naturally walked over to her and touched her on her forehead. "You've woken up. Does your head still ache?" She shook her head, feeling muddle-headed. Dijun's fingers stopped at her temple, massaging it. It looks like the sobering elixirs were quite effective. As he spoke, he turned and went behind the wooden screen towards the side, and the swishing sound of clothing being changed followed. Fengzhou's foggy mind was still inside a cloud. "So," she asked Dijun from the other side of the screen, "is another wedding being held on the campgrounds?" Dijun gave an N sound. Fengzhou made a half-sober E sound. "Then whose wedding ceremony is it today?" The sound of clothing being changed stopped behind the screen. "Yours." Fengzhou still had not responded to what was really happening. "Mine? Mine and whose?" Dijun walked out from behind the screen, fully dressed in resplendent regalia. Bending his head to adjust his sleeves, "Aside from me, who else are you thinking of having a wedding ceremony with?" Fengzhou went blank and was stunned. It's ours." She suddenly understood. This was Dijun making up a wedding ceremony for her. Then, she abruptly remembered what she had said to Chu-yi when Dijun arrived at that bridal chamber in Wenyuan Valley. Dijun must have heard those words and thought that she was demanding something, so She hurriedly sat upright and explained, I have not wanted you to make up a wedding ceremony for me. When I said I envied them, it was just something I casually said." She racked her brains, stammering at that time, "You were not there at our wedding ceremony." "I did have some regrets, but that was because I am a young girl. All young girls are like this, just not being very sensible, that's all. But I have truly never blamed you. Neither do I want the extravagance and waste, giving everyone the extra trouble. I am not that willful." Dijun walked over and sat by her side. He held her nervously clenched fist in his palm, calming her down. "You are not insensible, and you are not willful. He looked at her. I prepared this wedding ceremony not because you demanded anything from me. It was only because I wanted to give it to you. They were so close and were also alone together. But for the first time, the young maiden did not intimately cuddle up to him. She simply sat still for a while, as if lost in her thoughts. After a while, the rim of her eyes reddened, little by little. She leaned her head to the side and asked him, sobbing, Di-jun, I am very happy, but why do I feel like crying instead? She had perfect apricot eyes. Her eye clefts were wide, the corner of her eyes were rounded, so her eyes appeared to be particularly large. Whenever she laughed or cried, they became especially innocent and vivid. He raised his hand to soothe her tears, but she grabbed his wrists. Then she grasped his hand, leaning her head slightly as she touched her cheek to the back of his hand. After that, her cherry blossom lips gently pressed onto his palm. He let her be so, his eyes deep as he gazed quietly at her without blinking. When she lifted her head after she had her fill of pressing her lips against his palm, he stretched his hand out and held her small and delicate fair chin. She gazed at him in confusion, her eyes glistening like water. As if she was surprised, her lips unconsciously fell open slightly. He looked intently into her eyes, then he lowered his gaze and stroked her lower lip with his thumb somewhat forcefully. Those pink lips became plump and beautiful, like a splendid blooming flower. He leaned forward, kissing those lips. Her eyes widened, both her hands clenching his sleeves uncontrollably. Nearby, the colorful lantern popped, exploding into a lantern flower. But no one cared. His kisses wandered over and over on those red lips as she slowly closed her eyes amidst that tender kiss. The auspicious hour approached. Several million officers and soldiers of the god race held their battle axes, clothed in full battle armor. They lined up on the east side of the Jiashui River, respectfully welcoming the Emperor Lord and his Empress out of their tent. The bugle horns of the east sky sounded 3 times as the thundering battle drums on the side of the expansive river rang out in accompaniment. Amidst the sound of deep drum beats, the silver-haired venerable god, accompanied by his beautiful wife, walked out of their tent together. Both of them were dressed in purple robes. The brocade robes were made from the silk threads spat by the gold and silver silkworms that reside on the mythical twin mulberry tree, where the 3-legged golden crow perched on. The 7 treasures of gold, silver, agate, azure stones, giant clams, corals, and scarlet pearls adorned the robes, making them so resplendent and stately that it was impossible to see up close. Under their feet was a long continuous cloud path paving the way directly to a high platform built by the banks of the Jiashui River. The platform was very wide and was made out of a single piece of jasper. In the middle of it grew a large heavenly tree. The trunk of the tree was so high that it pierced through the clouds, while its crown could be said to be so vast that it would cover half the battlefield in Jiashui. Fengjiu raised her head, making an effort to see the tree. She was able to distinguish the feather-like leaves of the heavenly tree and its coral-like red flowers. Expressing her surprise in a low voice, "Isn't this the Parihata tree that grows on the 33rd floor of 9 heavens?" Di-jun gazed at the tree from afar. "I heard you say that marriages of the god race 260,000 years in the future will require going to Nu was placed to record the couple's names in the marriage registry. But Nu was current celestial office isn't in this role, so the marriages in the god race presently do not have this practice. Therefore, this cannot be done." He withdrew his gaze and looked at her. Among the spirit living things of the 8 realms, only the king of heavenly trees, the Parihata tree from the 33rd floor of 9 heavens, could bear the vows made by the king of gods. Hence, the rights officer Mo Yuan conferred at the investiture 3 years ago drew up a system of rites regulating the marriage ceremonies of the king of gods. It is stipulated that during the marriage ceremonies of the king of gods, marital vows need to be made to the Parihata tree. After that, the tree will lower the crown of gods, acknowledging the authority of the queen of gods on behalf of heaven and earth. Fengjiu appeared to be attending a class in history. I can't believe the master did not mention this before, But I remember that every generation of the Heavenly Lord's wedding ceremonies after that did not make any marital vows to the Parihata tree. Dijun looked into her perplexed eyes and smiled, stroking her head. It was probably because the few generations of what you refer to as Heavenly Lords were not kings of gods. Holding her hand and leading her towards the high platform, let's go and see what kind of crown it has prepared for you. In pace with their approach to the heavenly tree, the millions of officers and soldiers knelt down one after another like the waves of the ocean. The sound of "Greetings to the Emperor Lord, greetings to the Empress," vibrating throughout the northern realms in a continuous and unending stream. The red sun rose from the horizon, and the sound of bells chimed from the 9 heavens above. It was the sound pledging the precise auspicious hour. As the faint chime of bells faded slowly into the distance, a shower of mandara, manjasaka, golden adumbra, malika, kuzuma, tandarika, and other spectacular flowers fluttered down one after another from the heavens. In an instant, all of the great land of the 8 realms were bathed in the skyful rain of flowers. Dijun, in the company of Fengjiu, stepped onto the jasper platform. He led her to stand in front of the king of heavenly trees representing heaven and earth on it. Then he magicked the golden scepter of the Parihata tree onto his hand, holding it horizontally aloft. The millions of officers and soldiers kneeling below the platform also uniformly held their weapons aloft in a similar fashion, executing the rite of vows. The sound of armor striking sounded as one, resonating throughout the eastern side of the Jiashui River. It was solemn and imposing, leaving one feeling astounded. Although Fengjiu had seen many great aspects of the world, she had truly never experienced such a scene before. The solemn atmosphere was contagious, and her heart couldn't help but beat in a continuous staccato. She quietly pressed her chest that held her wildly beating heart, listening to Dijun saying his vows, word by word, line by line, in the face of the gods of the 8 realms, towards the Parihata tree, Qingqiu's woman. Fengjiu of the Bai clan is lively and intelligent. Born with natural elegance blessed by the heavens, she has deeply won my heart. But at this moment, a gigantic wave suddenly surged from the slow-flowing waters of the Jiashui River by the side of the platform. Afterwards, a hideous rumbling erupted from the ground in between the sound of cracking earth. Separating the river waters was the enchanted ward made from the essence of the northern lands. The ward, resembling a huge black cover enclosing the entirety of the northern realms, abruptly opened, revealing neatly and densely packed row after row of soldiers. Fengjiu's mind hummed, and she responded immediately, its high god Fu in using Dijun's marriage ceremony, at a time when the god race would loosen their vigilance to send his troops out. She gripped Donghua's hand tightly, somewhat flustering Dijun. At a rough glance, Fu Ying's triforces lined up in formation outside the river, appearing to be numbering in the millions. Horizontally in front of the troops, along the banks of the Jiashui River, was the vanguard army consisting of thousands of enormous hunting monster beasts struggling to get free. The monster beasts gathered in a cluster, hissing towards the heavens in a terrifying cacophony of sounds. Under the jasper platform, the officers and soldiers of the god race quickly responded and immediately moved to their positions, lining up in formation. Fengjiu turned her hand over, grabbing Dijun's hand, attempting to pull him off the high platform. But Dijun stopped her. "Don't be afraid," he said softly. Dijun's Sanghe sword appeared magically, and he held it by the edge of the blade, his crimson golden blood flowing down along the length of the sword's blade. At the same time, Fu Ying, riding his mythical winged serpent mount, circling in midair on the opposite bank of the river, suddenly waved his hand, signaling his orders, attack. The monster beasts with their ferocious features revealed, bearing fangs and brandishing claws, waded into the river, rushing towards them. Dijun raised his hand. The body of the Sanghe sword violently lengthened and grew like a millennium-old giant tree. After that, it duplicated itself 1,000 times over and lined up in an erect row on the east bank of the Jiashui River. The awe-inspiring swords merged into one with the crimson golden blood. In a flash, the thousands of Tangqi swords joined together, taking the form of an indestructible crimson golden barrier ward. A few demonic water dragons at the front of the pack of monster beasts dashing across the river had flown across to the other side, and were preparing for a slaughter when they ran headlong into the wall of the barrier ward. Two of the demonic water dragons had rammed their bodies right into the edge of the Tangqi's blade, forming part of the barrier ward. Before they could even howl, they were already cut into several pieces by the keen crimson golden blood-infused blade of the Tangqi. Feng Jiu gazed at that powerful barrier ward in shock. The monster beasts advanced wave upon wave only to be entirely buried outside the barrier ward, momentarily turning the outside of the crimson golden barrier into a hill of corpses amidst a sea of blood. Fu Ying, astride his mythical winged serpent in midair, was flustered and exasperated. He began casting spells in an effort to break the barrier ward. Although she could not see if Fu Ying's efforts in attacking the barrier had any effect on it, Feng Jiu was still worried. Dijun picked up the scepter of the Parihata tree that had been floating in midair once again. Feng Jiu could not believe it. You still intend to carry on with our marriage ceremony? Dijun was calm and collected, looking as if they were not really on a battlefield at that moment, acting like they had not just encountered a surprise attack by the enemy troops and besieged by the monster beasts. He calmly comforted her, "Don't be afraid, we still have the time of one incense stick, and all the ceremonial rites will be fully completed by then." He took a glance at the barrier ward standing firmly at the banks of the Jiashui River. This time, nothing will go wrong midway. Feng Jiu stammered, but Dijun interrupted her, holding her icy cold hand and assuaging her fears for the third time. "Don't be afraid, I am here." Comforting her, "If I say it will be all right, then it will be all right." He waited till her hands did not feel as icy before turning to face the crowd of officers and soldiers below the platform. Raising the scepter in his hand high above him, his expression calm as he swiped the scepter from left to right. A golden ray of light burst out of the scepter, instantly covering the entire battlefield. Feng Jiu could not understand this hand signal, but the officers and soldiers below the platform were evidently familiar with the meaning it conveyed. As the ray of golden light spread out, the sound of their voices rang out with vigorous spirit in unison, array. When the golden ray of light reached the horizon, a cavalry mounted on the Mengji beast suddenly emerged prominently from all directions in the sky. Rider and mount were both in full iron clothing. Then the Mengji beast raised its hoof and dashed to where they were standing, hovering steadily in the air, kneeling before the King of Gods with both knees forward, its disposition expressing his allegiance to him. From the ground came the sound of weapons and armor striking, the sound grand, solemn, and sublime, as the ground soldiers divided into 8 camps, assembling into the Qianyuan Greater Formation. The battle flag fluttered ostensibly in the whistling wind. Everyone was prepared and ready for battle. Dijun raised his head, glancing at the barrier ward that was still steadily stopping the advance of the monster beast, but he had no intention of immediately removing the ward. Instead, he turned and walked towards the sacred tree to continue the ceremony that he had not completed earlier. On the contrary, what he was doing seemed to be reasonable and fair, and did not make anyone feel that it was abrupt. Feng Jiu of the Bai clan is lively and intelligent. Born with natural elegance blessed by the heavens, the young man's voice was gentle. "She has deeply won my heart. I willingly bind myself to her in the bonds of matrimony, faithfully staying by her side for eternity." As soon as his words were spoken, the entire body of the Parihata tree blossomed with the soft illumination of the serenely beautiful 7-colored light. Then, a crown of gods made of the blooming flowers of the Parihata tree fell from amongst the luxuriant branches of the heavenly tree. The crown was caught by several birds with beautiful colored feathers holding it with their beaks, slowly presenting it before Dijun. Donghua took the crown of gods from the beaks of the birds and looked towards Feng Jiu. "The Parihata tree's taste in aesthetics is pretty good. This crown of gods is not bad, isn't it?" Feng Jiu admired Dijun for his ability to still crack a joke at this moment. Her eyes fell onto the ornately beautiful crown, and the rims of her eyes reddened uncontrollably, rendering her speechless for a while. Dijun took a step closer and placed the crown of gods on top of her head. The sacred tree had dropped the crown of gods, which represented its recognition of the status of the queen chosen by the king of gods. The numerous officers and soldiers already in formation neatly raised their weapons and stood at attention to their right of front to show their respect to the queen of gods. The uniformed sound of their weapons thrilling the hearts of people, making it inexpressibly dignified, solemn, and respectful. Dijun stood behind Fengjiu and held her hand, grasping the scepter of the Parahata tree with her, whispering softly by her ears, "Since you have already become their queen of gods, you will be the one to command them to initiate the fight in this final battle." As he said those words, he grasped her hand that firmly held the scepter and waved it to the right. The bugle horn sounded the call to charge. The Tangqi sword withdrew the barrier ward. The soldiers gathered momentum, uniformly chorusing, "Attack!" On the east side of the Jieshui River, the two armies clashed head-to-head. The Battle of Jieshui was the final confrontation between Dijun and High God Fuing. The war persisted for a total of 49 days. In 49 days, the iron hoof of the god race trampled the northern realms. Fuing was greatly defeated. The entire rebel army led by him was completely wiped out. The Ghost Lord and the Monster Lord handed in their surrender documents, but Dijun refused to accept them. In the end, Fuing, the Ghost Lord, and the Monster Lord were beheaded by the Tangqi sword, and the corpses of the three lords sank to the bottom of the North Sea. Fengjiu did not stay at Jieshui to experience the whole war. The battlefield was tough and perilous. She had no desire to distract Dijun, so she returned to the Heavenly Jade Sea accompanied by Fei Wei on the second day. This happened before the war ended. It was a day Fei Wei was serving Fengjiu and Little Gun Gun in the vegetable garden, watering the Yanji vegetables that were just planted not long ago. Fengjiu said that Dijun loved to eat Yanji vegetables, and when Dijun returned victorious from the war and arrived home to the Heavenly Jade Sea, the first batch of vegetables would have just ripened. The two of them were discussing this when Fengjiu suddenly changed the subject and asked Fei Wei, "The wedding ceremony between myself and Dijun, that day on the battlefield, was really a ruse by him, right?" Fuing hiding in that ward created from the essence of the land was frustrating, so letting him believe that Dijun's wedding ceremony would loosen the army's vigilance, possibly luring him out was what Dijun was thinking, right? She paused. Fuing finally did come out as expected. Fei Wei was caught off guard, and his heart jumped. He was surprised that Fengjiu was able to discern what had really happened, and though she did not get it completely right, it wasn't far from reality. It was indeed the truth. The army led by Fu Ying could not restrain the Qianyuan Greater Formation and was forced to hide into the northern realm. But it was impossible for him to hide in the ward forever, and he would have to find an opportunity to come out. Besides, Dijun's style of handling matters had always leaned towards resolving problems in the shortest time possible. Since when would he tolerate continuing hundreds and thousands of years of confrontation with Fuing? Dijun knew that Fuing was stubborn and self-opinionated, and also had a rash temperament. Hence, after the siege of the Northern Realm, marriages took place on the battlefield from time to time. During these occasions, he would command the army at the camp to relax their vigilance for an hour and a half right from when the formal ceremonial rites would begin. At the same time, Dijun had employed a stratagem of disseminating some so-called counter-formation drawings that could restrain the Qianyuan Greater Formation to Fuing. The produced counter-formation drawings looked very genuine. Although Fuing was impetuous, his aides and advisors were still cautious, so they investigated and studied the drawings in detail several times, but could not find anything unusual. Furthermore, the spies that Fuing sent out to investigate had found that every wedding ceremony held on Dijun's campgrounds looked genuine, and that the hour and a half of loosened vigilance wasn't a ruse. His aides and advisors had mostly come from a background of civilian court officials with meticulous mindsets. Though they were not able to find anything suspicious, they still persuaded Fu Ying to quietly wait for an opportunity. How was one to know that Dijun would also get married on the battlefield? In Fu Ying's opinion, this was an exceptional opportunity to destroy Dong Hua's wedding ceremony and to invigorate the morale of his own army. Hence, he went against the advice of his aides and insisted on opening the ward and declaring warfare on that day. Fei Wei had no idea how to explain to Feng Jiu that Di Jun had not made use of her. His forehead was soaked in cold sweat as he stuttered, "His Imperial Lordship." His Imperial Lordship really did not treat the marital rights between the two of you as a tool to lure Fuing out, even though it did indeed have this effect. But don't misunderstand His Imperial Lordship. As Fei Wei wiped his cold sweat off, he finally found a point to prove Di Jun's sincerity, so he was able to speak more fluently when you first visited Jiashui and said that you envied the wedding ceremony by the banks of the Jiashui River. His Imperial Lordship took it to heart and since then has initiated preparations for it. In order to do this, he did not hesitate to dig up the king of heavenly trees that grows on the 33rd floor of 9 heavens and move it to the northern realms. Feng Jiu chuckled, interrupting Fei Wei. "Why are you so nervous?" "I do not feel that he has used me. If it were just to lure Fuing out, wouldn't it be the same result if he got his most capable celestial general to marry? Not only that, it would not have required him to dig up the king of heavenly trees and have it moved there. He is a venerable god of the 8 realms, and he is this world's stabilizing force superscript 1 inch." She smiled slightly. "Did you know that in 260,000 years, as long as Di Jun is honored in the halls of Taichin Palace, no one in the 4 races of heaven and earth would dare to act rashly? The man I admire and adore is not simply a respected god that anyone can ask to love like a regular man and woman. He has to carry the burden of the world on his shoulders, and I have always understood this." Fei Wei was stunned. "Di Ho Yu." The young maiden dressed in red raised her eyes to gaze towards the distant sky, which was the precise direction of the northern realms. "Di Jun has already accomplished the best he can for me. Previously, I said that the best Di Jun is the one I know 260,000 years from now, but that is incorrect." There was gentle affection in her eyes. "The Di Jun of any time is always the best one." Fei Wei was silent for a moment and felt a little moved. He finally understood why there were numerous women who admired Di Jun in the 8 realms, but it was just this girl who could make Di Jun treat her so differently. She was beautiful but not bewitching, intelligent without being cunning, knew righteousness and reasoning, and was kind and considerate. Within these 8 realms, there was no other person like her who was not only desirable to Di Jun, but could match him this well. Fei Wei smiled imperceptibly, a sudden sense of comfort arising in his heart. End of Back to Chaos in a Dream. Chapter 7.